Welcome to the Atelier Melusine, southern and southwest France. Here we are today recording with our current exhibiting artist, Sarah Jones, otherwise known as Cutsy.
Hello.
Hello. And Sarah's got a wonderful exhibition of expanded painting in the building and grounds, and so we're going to have a little discussion about the work. That's okay.
Yeah, lovely.
Fantastic. So I know you trained as a printmaker and have had quite a long career with different changes and evolutions of your work. Could you say a little bit more about your training?
Yeah, well, I originally trained at Camberwell Art College in the 70s when I was very young and naive, and I went off to college and actually did a graphic, I think it was on a graphics course, but I was more interested in the printmaking department, so I spent most of my life in the printmaking department and did most forms of printmaking, which I felt very at home with, that process of working from the backward process that some people get confused by, but I really like working from light to dark and overlaying colours and forms and so on. So I really enjoyed that. But I didn't complete my course. So I was also a musician and went off into the world of music.
Okay. So what did you do?
So I did the usual thing. I joined a punk band and played saxophone and, married the lead singer, that kind of thing that you do. When you're
and what year was this? So when was this? When did you actually get married? And
oh God, well, I went to college in 1977 and I managed to stay till 1981, I think. So I nearly finished the course. And then in 1981, I went off and played
And which
saxophone.
band was it?
It was a band called Cardiacs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
classic British art school process.
Totally. Yeah. And then played at the college, and the music was so Marmite and really not fashionable music. So I played at college, and the next morning nobody spoke to me at all in the canteen, and I was completely dissed, and that was the end of that. And I just thought, well, you're meant to be open-minded, creative people, and you just can't handle it because it's not fashionable. And we're not wearing, at the time, I think it was New Romantics, we weren't wearing the right gear. So stuff it, so I left college.
Because the Cardiacs had quite a long life, didn't it? I mean, you must have played.
Yeah, it still exists now. We've still got our own record label, still all these years later. Unfortunately, Tim died in 2020, but there's still an album that's being worked on now. But yes, I mean, yeah, that's what I did for 10 years, and it was amazing. Yeah. It was amazing, and even after I left, I still played on albums and worked with people, and they're my tribe that I still love. Yeah, and that was a big thing.
Yeah, massive thing.
Massive thing, and it was great because it was totally independent. So we did everything, absolutely everything ourselves, from recording, producing, designing record sleeves, running a record label, just everything, like massive cottage industry stuff.
Yeah. But it's great music. It's fantastic. So what's the album that's not finished called?
Well, I think it's going to be called, unless it's a title in progress, I don't know, LSD.
Okay. Which stands for?
Yeah, I don't know.
Me neither.
I'm not.
So moving swiftly.
I don't know what LSD is.
So
yeah.
So after the band, you then had a period not involved in contemporary arts practice, or did you carry on your practice? And then you went back and did a master's. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, I've had a few incarnations. After leaving the music business, I actually needed to get well on certain levels, and I actually trained to be a homeopath, and I went off on a total tangent.
Okay.
And although it didn't feel like a tangent at the time, I got where a homeopath helped me get was my saviour, and I thought, right, that's what I want to do. And I trained, and then I specialised in birthing. So I actually then had my own clinic and spent 14 years helping people give birth.
Wow.
Which was another totally amazing thing. And it wasn't until I've been doing that for a long time that I felt really exhausted, and felt that I hadn't really used my creativity in terms of, I had with people, but not in terms of my art. And I started, yeah, painting and drawing again in my own time, and doing a few little courses, and doing more and more and more and more until I decided that that's what I wanted to do again.
And then you went back and did a...
I did an MA a few years ago. Yeah.
And whereabouts?
Hereford College of Art.
Okay, fantastic. And
Yeah.
what did you specialise in the MA?
They don't really have to specialise.
just-
I mean, in fact, the course that I did, it was a bit like doing a foundation course. The whole idea was to smash all preconceptions and go right back to trying everything again. So I had went in with the idea that I was going to become or look more deeply into abstract painting, which is what I started off doing. Then COVID hit. Then my 4 people in my family died, and I had to have a year off in the middle of a year's course. So I literally did 6 months. All of that happened, and I went back again a year later, and I wasn't painting anymore. I was suddenly picking up pieces of wood and placing them in the ground and seeing them as markers of something that was still in this mad life, like just still points which had a meaning or a homage to something.
So very personal work.
Yeah.
And very grounding work. So literally grounding that experience.
Yeah.
And that's how the post work started.
Yes, that, and coming across an artist called Andre Caderet, who had done who influenced me to start with. I did a few pieces influenced by his work, smaller pieces. You know, he was a kind of artist that had been, I might get this wrong, I think it was in the 70s, he was in Paris. And he wasn't really accepted by the art world at the time. So he was making these, they call them round bars. They were beautiful long pieces that were portable, so you put them over his shoulder. He was a bit of a performance artist, I suppose. And they were segments of colour. That's what I took from him, these sort of segments that were slipped onto a central pole. And he used to walk around with them and leave them in other people's exhibitions. And and when he did get eventually recognised, when he sold his pieces of work, they had certificates of, you know, whose exhibitions they'd been in and what park they'd been to and which cafe they'd sat in.
So part of the derive actually, and the walking.
Yes.
The walking techniques.
Yeah.
But your poles are very static. They're not.
They are very static.
Yeah, and that's a personal growth from the COVID experience and the loss of. I
think just that I've always had a thing about stripes forever, and artists that use stripes. And I really enjoyed his segments of colour. So it was something about that. I'm just making a piece myself as a homage to, I made 7 pieces, homages to 7 of my favourite artists. And it was that process of making them and then enlarging them and then realising actually what I want to do are still pieces.
Yeah. And we have the homage to Ken Kiff piece here in the exhibition, which is lovely. And I know also your practice is tied up with your father's career as an artist and influences like that. Inescapably, I don't know.
Yes, inescapably, very subconscious level. Yeah.
So could you say a little bit more about Mike Cutts?
Yeah, well, he's just coming to the into my life as an artist now, consciously now. But he was a painter his whole life, from being a teenager until when he couldn't paint anymore because he got dementia, and that was in his 80s. So he probably painted for 70 or 60 years, pretty much every day, and it was his whole life. The whole way he went about life was in relationship to painting and what he discovered through painting.
Mm.
He did exhibit, but he wasn't that interested in exhibiting. So I think for him it was a very personal experience. He was born in the wartime, no, well, before the wartime, but experienced wartime and the horrors of it. And yeah, and just the changes in the world from when he was born in the 30s. But he was very quiet about his work. So he always had a studio, he was always working. And when I was a child, he brought me up while my mum went to work. But he didn't talk about his work.
Okay.
And there were occasions when I'd say, I really want to paint. Hey, Dad, I really want to paint. Tell us about painting. I really want to learn about painting. And he'd just be like completely, that's just something you learn yourself. Yeah, but how do you mix colours? Well, you'll just start mixing colours and then you'll find out how to mix colours. Well, do you use paints, acrylics? I mean, what's the best? I mean, what do you just like Mr. Complete Silent? Didn't
did
ever
he
tell
write
me
about
anything.
his work?
Yeah, lots of writing. And that's all coming out at the moment. So yeah, so my brother, since my father died, we've collected his works together, so we've got hundreds of his paintings and years of writing and diaries. And my brother is currently picking out some of his quotes and putting them next to paintings. I mean, so they weren't necessarily to go with those paintings, but we're just trying to put things together.
So that's a very interesting parallel, because your work has emerged kind of before that, but then it's coming.
Well, I realised I didn't start painting until he stopped painting, which is so interesting. It wasn't a conscious thing, but when I look back, when he stopped being able to paint, he always used pure pigments mixed into PVA, actually. And I took some of those pigments away and started experimenting with them. And I realised that my painting actually didn't start till his stopped, which is interesting, isn't it?
So almost like an unconscious permission to
begin. He had a big presence. My mother was also an artist then. She found it difficult to work with him being so prolific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's fascinating.
So yeah, so it's always been there, but in a really subconscious way. I mean, I can't put my finger on it. We're beginning to put our fingers on it now, which is exciting.
And when you're talking about pigments, because you use a wide variety of pigment in your work, can you talk a little about the choice of pigments and the range of pigments? Well,
I mean, I inherited pure powdered pigments. So I've got jars of pigments that will come from that amazing shop in London, is it? Cornelius, or it sounds like Cornelius, the name of the shop in London. I always get it wrong, it's not quite that. But yeah, I mean, there they are. Some of them are highly toxic.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't, I don't know if you can still buy them today. Yeah. Lots of them made from lead and so on. And I've just tried them in different mediums. So I've tried them in oil, I've tried them in, actually I've discovered something called Cuni, C-U-N-I, which is a new medium that's been made in Spain. And it's made from, I think it's the original recipe for very old encaustic paintings. Which is wax. It's a sort of wax and soap base.
Okay.
So it's actually totally ecologically fine. There's no poison in it at all, unless you put the poisonous pigments in.
The pigments which aren't quite poisonous.
Not all of them. I'm trying not. I'm not replenishing the poisonous ones. And that's a beautiful, beautiful medium. So it's an encaustic medium. You don't need to heat it. And it just has a very lovely thick texture. So that's kind of where I got to with my paintings.
It also has a kind of luminosity, doesn't it? It traps the light in a really particular way.
Yeah. There's a thickness to it. Yeah. And you can actually thin it right down, and so that it's almost like a gouache texture. Or you can use it incredibly thickly, and then scrape into it. You can also sort of polish it up, you know, rub it, because it's got the wax in it, and you get this beautiful soft, a bit luminous.
Yeah, because it's not
luminescent
shiny,
quality.
but it has such a
Yes,
richness
that's what it is.
of colour, and you use
Yeah.
Danish oil in your work as well.
Yeah, sometimes I put the pigments into Danish oil if I want the pigments to sink right into the wood. I'm still experimenting. I mean, sometimes I'm just using acrylic paints. The wooden, I don't think I can call them sculptures. I think I call them posts that I'm making. It's interesting because the first few that I made were bought. And I had made them to be outside, and in fact, people are putting them inside. So I've now got to the point where I'm not bothering to put, unless somebody says that there's a commission and it's specifically for outdoors, then I use a varnish that I've discovered, a very lovely flat matte varnish, so you wouldn't know it was on the work. But most of these pieces seem to be being indoors, so I'm not putting that on at the moment. I'm just using whatever I enjoy using. And it's interesting the finding the ontology for it, because I have treated it as expanded painting rather than sculpture, and the elements are all painted and then reconstructed. So there's a process of deconstruction, or there's a process of salvaging and finding, because most of the work is recycled or reclaimed or foraged, and then treating the surface as you would for a canvas or a painting. So the surface is then prepared. Is it primed? Is it? Yes, it is where it's painted. So really traditional painting techniques, and they're using gessos and so approaching the support in a very classical painting way, and then reconfiguring it. So I kind of don't have it as sculpture, I have it as expanded painting. I feel much more comfortable with it being expanded painting, and I'm interested in expanded painting. I like because the support is three-dimensional, and can be motile and many segmented, but it's still using very traditional painting approaches, and the fascination is with form and colour on surface. So sorry, absolutely.
I interrupted you.
No, but that I agree, and I like the expanded painting game of taking elements of painting, which there's the paint, there's the brush, there's the support, etc. The colour
and form and scale.
Exactly.
Composition.
And it's all there.
And
I really love the slicing of the wood. I mean, I've been making different pieces recently, but even so, I always go back to this slicing of the wood with the colour in between the slices, just with a slight gap. I put a small spacer in, so that it is actually the light coming through. It's almost like
and hitting the painted surface.
And it's almost like inside this wood. Look, there's something being revealed from inside the wood, which I really like.
And they're so beautiful. They are so beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful in reproduction, but they're wonderful in actuality.
Thank you.
The colour choices are also really interesting, because you're working with quite formal primary and there's lots of secondary colours, but they're still often complementary. So is there I know when we've talked, you said how much you like red and green, but there are yellows and blues and pinks and lots of pastels and very bright colours.
Well, I suppose each piece is just a unique piece. I don't always know what I'm going to do to start with. When I came here to do this residency, we had a theme, didn't we? So the theme being around Beltane and the time between the spring equinox and Beltane, that whole period of time where everything's coming back to life. Traditionally, the colours associated with those are white, green and red.
And that's reflected in some of the work.
Yes, in the work I've made since I've been here.
But I've witnessed you making very specific colour choices.
I mean, it's definitely so. Exactly in the same way as I would if I do a painting.
A 2D painting.
Exactly the same. But I very often will start with a painting, or start with looking at a painting, or look at something as if I was going to do painting, and then I break it down into 7 colours, and I didn't realise I was always using 7. And I used to be a musician, and somebody said to me once, "It looks like the notes of the scale," and I thought, God, that's so interesting. So I've played on that a bit more now, really, but I like the repeating of 7 colours, so that's often what I'm doing. And those colours, I take a lot of time choosing those colours.
And sometimes they're very subtle, so sometimes they're details.
Yeah.
So you have flat segments of abstracted colour, but then you have often pattern or stripe or detailed motif within those individual.
Yeah, sometimes, not that often. I'm trying to think. I have done in one of the pieces here.
And in the lent pieces as well as detail.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, they're quite new, aren't they? So they're more. I hadn't done that before I came here. Oh no, that's not true. I did, didn't I? No, I did. Yeah, I did. When I had my MA exhibition, I had a series of 7 pieces. I like reclaiming wood, usually old posts, but I do also like using sweet chestnut.
Yeah.
That's not totally green, so maybe it's seasoned for about a year. I strip it back, I sand it, I prime it exactly like, say, as if I was going to paint onto wood or do a painting, 2D painting. So during that show, I did a daily meditation. So each piece was made for each day. So I did a 2-hour meditation, a silent meditation. It was a performance piece. People were watching me. I did have a notice saying, I'll answer your questions at the end. I'm doing this in silence, but people don't always like that. It's like quite awkward to be silent. It's interesting, but I have a meditation practice, so I don't feel awkward about being silent. So each piece, I just responded to that day, the weather, the colour, the feeling, the people, myself, and did a sort of automatic painting, really.
Yeah.
It was a 2-hour thing. So at the end, yes, I ended up with 7 pieces that were supposed to be hung. They had an internal sort of screw and you could hang them. They didn't look very good when they were hung.
Okay.
We decided they looked like dead limbs.
Okay. Okay.
It didn't work. It didn't work. Body parts. So they just got lent. And then it was like, oh my God, it's really lovely, just leaning something against a wall. Yeah. And then it turned into this very physical thing, because I am into the physicality of making. I mean, I love the fact that it's quite strenuous working with wood.
And that kind of brings it back into a minimalist approach as well, with set patterns, set rules.
Yes.
And, it does touch in sort of postmodernist and minimalist genres of working with those. Yeah. Minimalist intervention, the object as it is, or lent, without a plinth, without but there's also, I'm interested in because there's the exoteric side of the work, but the esoteric side, because obviously when we're talking about the timing of it with May Day and the spring, and my resonance with the poles with the Asherah pole, which is of course the maypole and the Beltane thing. So, but the 7 is also such an esoteric number. So. And you're also an ordained Buddhist. Yes. Nun, is that correct?
We're not. We're just. We're not called. I'm an order member. We don't have nuns in the order that I'm in.
So your practice
as a lay.
Is that Buddhist. Contemplative and meditative?
Yeah.
Sort of sense comes through into the work as well, which is another reason that I love it very much. So. Is there a crossover? Is there a deliberate crossover, or is that just a natural evolution as well within the work?
Well, I went through a really deep training, 7 years of which was very specific towards going towards ordination, and I spent a lot of time meditating, time in silence. The actual ordination is we go to Spain and spend 3 months at the top of a mountain, most of that time in silence, and it has a really deep effect. You can't help but have a deep effect.
Yeah.
And it's and my work changed after that point, and I was just much more connected into what I was doing. It felt different from before. Before, I felt like my work was quite on the surface. That was fine, but
Yes, yeah.
there was something that I wasn't quite getting. I think it was much more to do with how
So
it
more
looked.
intuitive in a genuine sense of the
Well,
word.
I've always worked in an intuitive
Intuition.
way, but I think what happened after I learned to meditate was that, okay, so I learned to be still.
Yeah.
So I had never been a still person.
Okay.
So that one of the most profound things that happened in my life was I went for the first time to learn to meditate, and I sat down in this room with other people who were being still and quiet, and luckily the guy teaching us had a sense of humour, and it wasn't too serious. And we sat down for half an hour, whatever it was. And I went somewhere that I'd never ever been before in my life. And
Internally.
yes, yeah. And I realised it was probably the first time I'd sat still and shut up in my life, apart from sitting still and falling asleep, or sitting still because I was watching the telly or something. And I knew that was of great importance to me. These pieces are about being still in a mad world, really.
Yeah. Well, they're creating sacred spaces again, which is another connection to the work that we're then now going to do at Sabina's and Andrew's venue at Forge, because that's the next kind of process of it, which involves a ritual element as well as a meditative element, as well as a making element, and a collaborative element, because there is the many and the one within your work. You have the one with the many that contributes. So.
Oh, that's so interesting. You should say that. Do you know why that's interesting?
You tell me, Sarah, please. No, I don't.
Because nobody has said the many and the one.
Okay.
And that was my father's mantra. That's what he talked about his paintings as being, the many and the one, always.
Okay.
So that is so fascinating that you just said that.
Well, that's what they are to me as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. Isn't it funny how you connect in with things and you don't know why you're doing it?
But it's a fundamental human practice, because we have, especially if you're working in a meditative or spiritual practice, because you're aware of your personality within the collective, and it's the personal and the transpersonal is so important to that, and that's how we all function or try to function. So there's so much symbolism in such seemingly simple forms and images. Well, I'm glad that's there. Thank you. I'm glad it's there. I don't know really how it came about, except I know that it came about not from directly going and doing that, but from life experience ending up doing that. It was never. And our May Day celebration is another reason for having Paul to come and talk about natural beekeeping, because you have the collective and the queen, and it's going to be really interesting. I hope so. I think it should be wonderful. Yeah, no, I like the way it's going. I'm really interested to see what happens. I think everybody's really enjoying having you here, and it's inspirational for us as well. So I'd like to talk a little about the pieces in the exhibition. So when we come in, we have our big boy. Big boy. Big boy, he is. So we've got the first bit, which I named The Garden of Earthly Delights, after Bosch's painting. Which has a boy, for people watching. It has a boy at the top of it. Is that right? Or is it not a boy? Well, I don't think it's a boy in his eye, but it does look like a boy. Yeah, and reading up about when he was painting that, there were certainly references to astrologically to Venus, to the moon, to the sun, and to Cancer, which is obviously associated with water and navigation points as well. And so in the painting you will see references to those things that include suns and moons and those
the object in the painting that's supposed to represent Cancer, the crab, has that kind of sphere-like
crown,
and the colours. So I'm really motivated by colour.
Yeah.
So the colours in it are relating to his painting,
and
which
I love
obviously
that
is reflecting
and the
colours,
base of it
astrological
is
colours as
charred
well.
and burnt.
Yes.
So is that a reference to hell?
Yeah, so you've got
And
hell
you
at the
have-
bottom
yeah.
with the charred birds pieces moving up to the top, towards heaven. It does look like a bit like a rocket that might be going somewhere.
I don't think it looks like I don't think of it as a rocket, but it's a piece that has a lot of elements. It's a very powerful piece, and I think when you put it in the context of Bosch's painting, it takes on a completely different dimension. Also, it has the level of the four worlds, all of those elements, and it has a luminous paint in it. So it has
yes, fluorescent.
Fluorescent is the word.
Yes, so I absolutely love fluorescent paint. I get asked, why do you like fluorescent paint? I suppose it's just the luminous quality, isn't it? It's
Well,
the
it bends light
reflecting,
in a different way.
yeah.
It's a very physical, it's a very visceral response to different colours.
Absolutely. So I love that fluorescence jumping out of it in different sections.
Spatially, it makes a huge difference in any kind of object.
Yeah, and they were found, and it was lovely found objects. I was in Cornwall on a painting retreat, and the guy whose house we were staying in was about to burn this lovely huge post, a really big post. And I was like, "Oh, can I have that?" He's like, "Yeah, why do you want it?" And I told him. They said, "Oh, I've got other things. There's this buoy that came out of the Cornish Sea, and there's a bit of a shipwreck." So I was also given a bit of a shipwreck, which actually was really moving. Because I looked it up on YouTube, and it actually showed, because the ship was only wrecked in the 90s, I think, and there's actually YouTube footage of it being wrecked.
Oh gosh.
So anyhow, it had this, you've got the earthy quality of the post that had been in the earth for decades, that had just was being replaced by a new post, and then the water quality of the buoy. And I just think it's interesting that if you find objects, even if you don't know the story when you find them until afterwards, they do what's the word I'm trying to find?
Resonance. Right.
Yeah, it's the resonance, and you find that you make work. I mean,
it links to it somehow.
There's
a really odd temporal jump within that you pick up on.
Absolutely.
But it's such a strong piece. And it does have a seaside or a seafaring quality to it.
With the colours too.
Yeah. Almost, I think more of lighthouse than rocket when I see it. It has a beacon quality.
Well, it's going somewhere. I mean, it's static, but I do think it's going, like, between heaven and hell. I mean, it is it is straddling two worlds. I suppose a rocket's a crude thing to say, but yes, it's interesting, isn't it?
So it's a wonderful piece. It's a really wonderful piece. I love it.
Thank you.
Keeping it. And then we move into the next room, which has Mum and Dad in it, which is a hugely personal, moving piece.
Yeah. So I was making a collection of pieces, and I started making those two maybe at the same time. So one thing about sometimes I have an idea for a piece. Sometimes the idea just comes literally from the wood itself. I didn't know I was doing a piece that was going to represent my father and my mother. And that just came to as I was making them. Sometimes I just slice I find lots of posts, or somebody says, "Oh, I've got a load of wood, would you like it?" And I don't get it. Slice it up, and I make holes into the centre, which goes onto this central metal column that you don't see that's supporting the piece. So, they're a bit like beads, they're interchangeable. And I really get excited by that as well. That they're just small interchangeable bits.
Well, there's a piece in the exhibition that will go on, which is for people to be able to do that and have that experience as well. Yeah,
so it's really lovely. So you can play with them for ages. So I think I was playing with those two pieces when I realised that one looked like my father and one looked like my mother. And a couple of years after they had died, and they died during COVID, so they didn't get a ceremony, they didn't get a funeral, their friends couldn't visit, you know, it was all completely in lockdown. So it wasn't so
again, no correct ritual or remembrance or memorial for them.
Absolutely. So I think this was my own ritual that happened in my studio, was I started to build them and realize that, oh my goodness, that is my mother, oh my goodness, that is my father. And then once I knew that I think after I knew that, I then realized what colors I needed to use.
Right, to go with it.
And
it's really, and each piece is dressed because most of the places have a very specific top.
Yes.
And your parents have very specific crowns, as whatever. Crown is a great word for the top of the painting. But they also have floral elements, or they have natural elements then intersposed that are frequently changed.
Yes. So that my father has got at the top, I've got a bit of old post that's still got its kind of a plastic ring in it, which would have held I guess electric wire, and it had some old nylon farm rope that was on the piece, and it was really amazing looking at it for lots of reasons. One, because when my dad, the last 18 months of his life, he was bedbound with Alzheimer's, and he had this strange moustache which he'd never had before, and it had got kind of yellowy and scraggly, and he really kind of wanted to chop it off, but he liked it. So I just realized it was his funny old moustache. And then the crown was this piece that I was just mucking about trying to work out whether I could use silver over grey or something. Some colours I was playing around with, and they were colours, well, they were his colour I was using, but it wasn't worked out. It was a throwaway experiment. And he loved to do that with his paintings. He was a very, very good painter. He was perfectly capable of doing, as people like, a representative perfect painting. He wasn't interested in that. But he would sometimes do something that was quite representational, and then he'd just throw something into the painting to completely destroy disrupt that. And I felt that's what happened when I put this piece on the top, because it wasn't beautiful, it wasn't supposed to go on the top.
So unintentional. Totally
unintentional, and it had this really weird effect, and I thought, oh yeah, he would have loved that.
It's very it's very marked, you can see that. And then your mother's piece is much more delicate.
Yes, so hers is much neater, which she was a neater person. And it's white and this white and orange, and the white, she was always clearing places and painting places white. So I felt white represented her really well, but also the orange in between, the orange segments in between. I realised when I looked at her, she loved to get things from junk shops. Lots of things had the old china that had orange, a sort of burnt orange colour.
I know.
And there's more significance, but I haven't got time to go into it.
No, it's just thank you for letting us show such personal work, because it's such a beautiful tribute, and it's such a personal piece of work, that piece, I know. So
it's there's much stuff about it. The flowers in the top were her flowers that when she died, I kept the flowers that were beside her when she died, and they've just turned into this beautiful dried white fluffy flowers, which I couldn't bring with me because they would have disintegrated, so I just popped a bit of ivy in the top. Yes, lilac one vein, ivy the next day.
And then we moved then up through the exhibition, and we have the homage to Ken Keith, which is perched again, lent in the back courtyard. Which is a beautiful little piece.
So that was one of my pieces directly from Andre Caderet.
And
you
with the
know,
7 artists, the 7 inspirational.
I had 7 artists at the time that I was interested in, and I was looking at their work, and I just picked 7 colours that they seem to use a lot in their work. Whether they were aware of it or not, I could sort of pick out these colours that seem to crop up in their paintings time and time again, and that they were just simple little stripy pieces, very much based on Andre Cagaret's work, but also based on the colours of artists. So that was just a simple little.
Well, it's just a gorgeous
bit of fun.
Yeah, but it is a gorgeous, fun piece and portable. It's a very different scale. So
yes,
it's a small...
yes. And it ended up being because I loved the way he leaned things, left things. At my MA exhibition, I left it just leaning in the corner of the toilet. Without a label, and I loved that. So then I photographed it actually in lots of different toilets round and about. I'd take it to my friend's house and just always have it leaning behind the loo.
Which is curious because that was a piece we were going to take on a walk and photograph. So it is a mobile.
Yes. Oh, it is a mobile.
It's a mobile piece, so it can be a performance piece, an installation piece. And then the works in the garden, the exterior works, have kind of 2 themes. So we have the Lent pieces, the Lent fan pieces. And then the posts again. Yes, and all of those pieces. So the first 4 that we've mentioned actually were pieces I've already made. Yeah. So all the ones outside upstairs are all the pieces that were made being here in France. Which is amazing, considering the time you've had. Yeah, I had about 3 weeks to get that together. And yeah, well, I was kind of thinking of this, you know, real-time movement from the equinox, spring equinox, to Beltane. So it's interesting how we project things. So I thought, oh, I'm going to be in France. It's going to be all warm, and I'm going to be working outside in the sun, creating southwest these France funny pieces. And it was just been utterly freezing and wet. So I couldn't work. I mean, I did work outside for a little bit, but mostly I was working inside, really cold. And then we all got ill. And then we've all got ill. Yeah. So that idea had to be dropped, that projection. But I've still really enjoyed making them. So I spent time at La Forge and in the workshops there. In the workshops there, and walking around their grounds and finding. It's actually quite difficult to find wood that you can use because it can't be totally green because you can't paint on it. Yeah. And if you're just sort of in the woods, as it were, most old wood has started to rot. So we did find this a couple of amazing trees that had fallen down but hadn't rotted. and we could and I could slice them up without them, falling to pieces. So Andrew very kindly lent me all his equipment in his big studio so I could slice wood up. I brought my pillow drawer from England, Whitney Helms. But yeah, so basically all the pieces were made from finding stuff in the woods. Yeah. So they're all found in Forge. It's all found in Forge, and I don't know what all the different woods are. I think some of it's pine, but I don't actually know what the wood is. I just had to find a wood that was suitable, that I knew cured enough and not falling to pieces. Yeah. And actually, so I did things I hadn't done before, which is what you're supposed to do. Yeah, and you did integrate 2 previously made pieces, so the 2 holly posts have gone in with those, which have the red and the white. Yeah. And then you've done detailed bits, so some are painted white, some are left natural, others have. So the leaning bits, the leaning pieces are just a matter of looking at them and thinking, thinking, do they stay natural? Do they have some colour put on them? Do they have some of their features emphasised? Do they just stay there with the moss? You've got the amazing green moss that's naturally there. So I added some red to go next on a piece on a stick
or branch next to the moss. So it was just exactly the same as doing an abstract painting. It was exactly the same.
Yeah, same process.
Same process.
Just using
Where
the
you just
elements, yeah.
where you just sort of lean and stand back, think, no, that needs moving, no, the colour needs changing. Yes, the same process.
Yeah, there's a lot of standing back, there's a lot of reflecting time within the work.
And you know when it's finished.
Yeah. It's right when it's finished. It feels right. Compositionally.
Yeah.
So you've got that very intuitive internal composition selection working.
Yes, and you've got the 2 holly pieces in there. I don't know if the 2 holly pieces work in there. I think when we move stuff to Forge,
they may be separate.
I might take them out.
Okay.
I'm not
It'd be
sure.
so interesting to see in the different space from having them separated out as a almost as a walk to then being as a community.
Yes.
It's going to be lovely to see that.
Yeah. And whether they lean against the wall or actually become a pile on the floor, which quite interests me as well.
And then the Here Comes the Sun piece, which I absolutely adore, with its gold leaf. So you have the crown of that is a gold sun crown.
It is,
and then you've used the red, as in the red, white and green throughout. Yeah. And that's a stunning piece.
I really like that bit. That was very, very difficult to make because it was a very wiggly piece of wood.
And you've managed to keep that within the,
I've managed to keep it, but it's almost toppling, you know. And I couldn't just put holes centrally through the pieces. They've had to move, the holes had to move from side to side, and it was really complicated technically to make that. I mean, no one would know that.
No, I think if you know how it's made, it's absolutely the precision to get to allow the curved wood to keep its form with a metal internal support. It's really quite a bit of engineering and measuring.
It was. I had to redo it many times. And I love the red. I mean, I did stare at it for ages. I had primed it with white actually, and I thought, oh, shall I just keep these pieces white? But I knew it needed a colour, and it's so funny because I was almost not doing it red because it was so obviously the Beltane colour, and I had to sleep on it a couple of nights. I came in and it's like, no, it's red.
It's red.
It has to be red.
Yeah.
And then the top piece was an added piece from another post, and it is literally the top of a post. So it's the bit that's actually been in the ground. It's the pointed. I haven't cut it to that shape. It's the stake. Thank you. That's the word. Yeah. The stake. And I just found it amusing that an old muddy stake utilitarian thing could be cleaned up and have gold leaf put on it and become the sun.
It also, for me, it reminds me of a nib of a pen. Yeah, it has a pen nib quality. So every time I see it, I think of an old scribe.
That's lovely.
It has that echo with it.
And someone else saw it as a crystal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? You make something, and that's what I love about making art, is that people can interpret it any way they want.
That's what's beautiful about the abstraction.
I mean, I'm just interested really in the shape and colour, and if you then take that into a story, that's fantastic.
And the horns, so then...
Yeah, so then...
we have another double piece, which it's almost like an archway, or it is an archway.
It is, yeah. Or it's a...
doorway, a portal.
Yeah, it's a portal.
The Dalet. And that's called the colour of spring.
That's called the colour of spring.
And there's the deer horn, because it has deer horn inserts at the
It does. Ground. We found those in the ground. So we found one deer horn, and then Sabina already had one that had been found another year.
So just wonderful to have.
Which I don't know, that just seemed to resonate with Beltane as well.
Oh, with the horned god of spring and
absolutely.
and all of those things.
And also, because they have this shape, they can hold a top piece. Yeah. Which can be then, as we've done, wrapped with ivy and so on, sort of celebratory piece.
And those colours, because they're very different again from what is the thinking behind those colours, or the feeling behind those colours? Those
colours are based totally on there's photos I took of the wildflowers that were out at that time.
Wow.
So when I say the colour of spring, it
really is the colour.
It is the colour of the flowers that were growing up through the grass. I did name all of them, but I can't remember them now. But so very specifically,
Yeah, which is
very
incredible. So
specifically the colour of spring.
it's very, so it's a complete portrait. It's a landscape painting of Forge in so many ways. It's like a
nice,
three-dimensional landscape abstraction of
Yeah.
Forge at that time. There's such a nice mixture of temporalities within the work.
And that we move when it gets set up at Forge. It's going to be the first piece that you need to walk under to go
Walk
in.
through.
Set the scene. Yeah. And again, they were just two posts that had been in the ground holding a tree up that we took out. The tree no longer needed to be held up. And I love, you know,
That's
I
as
just
well.
love that.
Yeah.
Just taking something that was nothing in a sense.
Unnecessary, no longer necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we go up to the final piece at the top.
Yeah.
Which is, what's it called? Small post.
Oh well, that
No, it's
didn't it?
not.
Well, it is. It didn't get a name because it was so at the end, and I didn't know what was happening with it until it was set up.
Yeah,
Because I was
literally-
even changing
yeah.
the colours as it got set up. So it's not been named. So that needs to be named. But at the moment, it's just small post.
Okay. And again, the blue. It's the blues and whites and the stripes. So that that's the
Blues
one that
and
has the
whites and
details
oranges,
in it. Yeah.
It's also
Complementaries.
it also was based on, again, it was something I hadn't done before, where a tree had grown very much, the central core was all on one side, which does happen with trees if they're, you know, leaning or against the wind, they'll grow out to right themselves on the opposite side. And so I decided to just bore holes straight into actually what is the central core of the tree. So we had these strange shaped pieces. And I just thought, oh, well, they'd be really nice flipped around. So it's an unusual shape. Again, I'm just playing around with
I mean, it doesn't have the continuity. So
no, it doesn't look like a post as such.
Well, it has a very different form. It has a deliberate scale. But you've played with the scale of the pieces very differently than with the others. So, well, no, actually, that's not true because the Garden of Terrestrial Delights also has the playing with the scale. It's not a uniform.
Oh yes, post. It's not. No, it's not a uniform post. But I suppose it's that this one's got sort of pieces.
Yeah.
Well, what would you call it?
I called them hands. I said hands. Other people said rude things.
Yeah, God, what people like.
I know they look like
rude things.
I know.
Yes, and then they've still got sort of bits of branches coming off them, haven't they? Small.
Which I thought looked like upturned palms. That was my interpretation.
Yes, it was, wasn't it? It was your interpretation.
And then spouts other people.
And that one was kind of like a bit of fun with lots of bits that had been left over, and
Yes, but there was a lot of reflective time thinking about that, and it's funny within the positioning because it's the final piece where you reach. It's the final piece that you completed, and it did feel like a finishing point to making the work.
Yes,
and installing the work. So.
And we sat there, didn't we? We looked at it, and then I was
Discussed
like, no, that bit needs to change the blue quickly. Got the brush out, and painted it blue, and that's one thing that's so wonderful about working with wood. I mean, I suppose it's the same on a canvas, but you can just sand it off and just start again.
Yeah,
I love that.
Oh well, thank you so much for allowing us to show it.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I have more questions.
Thank you for inviting me to France. You saw my work and said, "Oh, I'd like you to bring it over."
Yeah, it's wonderful, and it works so beautifully from John's paintings into your expanded painting. It is just wonderful with that theme of postmodernist, postminimalist work. So, thank you.
Nice.
I'm afraid I have some other questions.
Oh, do you?
I think so. Yeah, I wanted to ask about other influences in your work. So, you've spoken a little about certain artists and how you can find thinking or patterning or rules or parameters in their work that you can then inject into your own. But who are your big influences?
My big influences.
Or who were they and how have they changed?
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, when I was a kid, I was completely madly in love with two artists. That was Chagall and Andy Warhol.
Okay.
So they're both very different.
Very colour-based.
Yeah. So everything's been colour-based.
Yeah.
I also love Stella's work. I also love, now I'm going to forget, the wonderful British female artist who uses all the stripes.
Bridget Riley.
Yeah, Bridget Riley, whose exhibition I've seen recently at the at Hayward. I've always liked Riley's work.
See, I'm just pointing at my chest arrays that are here.
Ah, yeah. I love your books. I read one of her books to my mum as she was on the last weeks of her life. I was just reading her chapter by chapter to her as she lay in bed. Yeah. Who else? Because there's so many people whose work I really, really like, and I'm going blank now. Very often abstract painters, and then but also that whole thing of which comes from printmaking, and I also did a lot of time as a batik artist as well.
The reduction. Yeah,
the reduction. So I get very excited about things and doing things automatically and so on, but then I also really like to reduce that down and think it through and actually do things in quite a calculated way. So I like the idea of playing, but then also being very
technical. It's actually very technical and quite analytical in how it's created. There's quite an intellectual content in there. It doesn't feel wildly expressive in that.
No, although some of my paintings have been in the past, but it's changed a lot.
Yeah, it's much more considered and constructive.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it restrictive. It's that contemplation that comes through and the understanding of the process, which now makes that process seem effortless, which is why the sun piece is so amazing, because it's technically very difficult to do that.
It is, to make a wobbly bit of wood stand upright. It's quite difficult.
It is.
Yeah.
And so other influences around that, music, obviously, artists, films, literature. What are the other big influences? Who are your musical heroes apart from David Bowie?
Oh my goodness, don't ask about my musical heroes, because I go blank again. I'm so bad at remembering names. I loved Frank Zappa. I loved Devo. I also like much more soulful music. Oh God, at my age, people like Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, but I suppose modern music. Don't ask me.
No, but I know you're very open to lots of musical genres as well.
Yeah, I mean, I really love folk music, and I love traditional Indian music. I absolutely love. I often work to traditional Indian music. I love Talking Heads. I particularly like the lyrics in Talking Heads. I'm probably missing out really important.
It doesn't matter. It's a difficult question to have that preparation.
I really love listening to. I actually usually work in silence. If I'm going to put something on, it tends not to be something. Occasionally, I want to sing along, but usually it's classical music. I love things I've realised that are repetitive, which is quite interesting. Looking at my work, I like things that repeat again and again and again and again and again and again.
Again, it's hardwired into us.
I really enjoyed working in a factory when I was young, and I used to do factory work in the college holidays and just pack things into boxes and then pack things into boxes. It actually really suits me. I like that repetitive stuff, and I was trying to think of.
Well, we touched briefly on your midwifery, and I know you don't call it midwifery, and your Buddhist practice, but I wanted to talk a bit more about the environmental aspect of your work and the importance of the environment to your practice.
Yeah, well, I think it's very important. I feel like I'm a real sort of Neanderthal in the modern world. I find the modern world very difficult, and I feel it's, as probably a lot of us do, we're just moving towards total annihilation because really we can't sustain at all what we're doing. I think I was just saying to you, if you just sit here and just look at what's on the desk in front of us, and everything it's taken just to make these few objects that are on the desk, and everybody has that. Plus times 1,000.
Times 8 billion this week.
It really disturbs me. And I really feel that we've got to live much, much simpler lives, and we've got to really work on wanting less, because I think people still want a lot, and we're still told that we can have what we want.
And that we're successful if we have what we want.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we can visualize whatever we want these days. There's that kind of new age thing that goes on, isn't it? It's fine. Just ask for what you want from the universe. We are just absolutely programmed to want more, and that disturbs me. I mean, I want more, I'm not saying I haven't seen that through myself. But I suppose working with refound objects and with wood that will eventually just rot down again. I really like that cycle of finding something, turning it into something that's really hopefully exciting or beautiful or stimulating for people to see, and then it will all just disintegrate again. That cycle, the same as a cycle of nature. Yeah, we can't prevent things from happening.
It's very real.
So, but I'm saying that, and yet I'm still aware that I'm using. It's a dilemma, isn't it? I know artists who will only use handmade paints and glaze and so on, and there I am with my fluorescent acrylic paints that are plastic. And it's a dilemma. I want that fluorescence. I don't want to just have more muted colours in my work. So we're always up against what we want. And so that's a great example of I want bright colours.
So there's paradoxes all the way through.
Completely.
But it's certainly your intention.
Yes. I want to tread more lightly on the earth and use less and want less. That's absolutely my mantra.
Well, I think that's probably a very lovely sentiment that we should all be taking.
And I just do hope that the pieces I make have got a still quality about them, because part of our issues we're not still. And when you find that stillness, which I have on a few occasions, and then lost it again really quickly, but when I have found it, I do know that kind of the answer's there, and you don't need anything for that, do you, except to stop.
No,
just need to stop.
Everything comes out of stillness and silence. That's what everything generates from. Well, thank you very much for exhibiting with us and working with us. And I can't wait forward to the next part of the exhibition.
Yes.
I can't wait for the next part of the exhibition.
I
know, it's only a few days. It's only a few days away.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. It's lovely talking to you as well. You're really good at putting things out and clarifying things. So it's really lovely to speak to you. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Something like that.